In the introduction to my dossier on the failure of the BaFin in the Wirecard case to the investigative committee of the German Parliament on November 17, 2020, I write the following. 1. Introduction. Wirecard's business model consisted, among other things, of processing credit card payments for online retailers, merchants. For technical and legal reasons, payments can only be made a few days later. In order to be able to offer immediate payment to merchants, a loan must be given. You need a banking license to lend, or you have to hire another bank for this business. Since the business of these short-term loans is high margin, they wanted to operate it themselves and installed a bank in the group. You also need a bank license to access the SEPA system, or in this case, you would have to commission another bank to forward the credit card payment via SEPA for a fee. In order to understand how money laundering took place at Wirecard, one must first look at the corporate structure that favored money laundering. In its origins, Wirecard consciously built a niche in the dirty corner. Payments for companies from the pornography industry and gambling were processed. Wirecard has specialized in this business for one simple reason. Conventional commercial banks or even public institutions such as savings banks or Volksbanks did not want to process such payments for reputational reasons. Just imagine it becoming known that the savings bank next door handles business for porn and gambling. The politically staffed administrative board of such a savings bank would be forced to dismiss the management immediately. Otherwise, the responsible district administrator and mayor would be voted out in the next election. Money laundering is usually associated with a great deal of effort, which arises from the fact that, for example, front men and front companies are used for the transactions in question. If front men are aware of their actions, or if special company structures have been set up to conceal the transactions, a risk premium will be charged in addition to the costs incurred. Since Wirecard, as a non-bank, did not have to maintain any corresponding money laundering control systems in the core company and no other controls took place, I assume that people were not necessarily aware of the money laundering problem. At least one should have assumed so. Accordingly, Wirecard has not charged a surcharge for money laundering, would certainly be an interesting item in the income statement. When the Federal Minister of Finance described Germany as a money laundering paradise on August 24, 2022, this was due to the fact that the authorities had promoted money laundering in Germany through their intended poor control. Due to the favorable fee structure, Wirecard should accordingly be described as a money laundering paradise within the money laundering paradise. From my observation, business with customers like Monarch Airline, who certainly did legal business, were a desperate try to enrich the customer portfolio with as much legal business as possible in order not to degenerate into a pure money laundering machine. Monarch has previously been rejected by other banks and payment providers. As with all products and services that are legally available, so too is money laundering. Not every money launderer's business model also fits the offer of the money laundering companies. For example, in case a technology company sells centrifuges or the necessary technology for uranium enrichment to countries subject to international trade sanctions, the company faces several challenges. Not only do delivery notes and goods issue receipts have to be falsified or front companies to be set up in order to handle the transfer of those goods via third countries. The payments received by the company for these goods and services provided are illegal. In order to be able to post the corresponding incoming payments on the company balance sheets, these funds have to be laundered. In such cases, it is a one-time payment, usually in the millions. Arms companies, for example, are also regularly faced with this problem. Wirecard's business model is completely unsuitable for this type of money laundering, since such payments would immediately be noticed for Wirecard's typical payment processing due to their amount. These payments would not only be noticed by the auditors, employees would have to carry out manual checks when certain amount thresholds were reached and would simply refuse to release such payments. The Furtash loan at Wirecard proved that. Based on the variety and frequency of transactions involving the money launderers described in Season 1, Episode 4, it has to be noticed that Wirecard's business model fitted them perfectly. On the normal black market, money in the order of a few thousand euros has to be laundered and distributed. Such payments are not noticeable in Wirecard's payment transactions. In addition, these payments do not occur once, but regularly. At Wirecard, these could be handled inconspicuously. If you wanted to search specifically for it, it would be like looking for a needle in a haystack. More on that in Season 4, Episode 1. What made me particularly suspicious during my time as a consultant at Wirecard was the widespread cluelessness. At Wirecard, I had to fight on all fronts. As a sub-project manager, it wasn't actually my job to go down to the turf because of inadequate data models and poor data quality. This means that in order to achieve the project goals, I had to analyze the business data, increase its quality, and expand the parameter catalog in order to be able to build functioning systems. When it comes to the skills required to do this, the wheat is usually separated from the chaff. At this working level, I quickly meet the old hands in the company. These are the people who have accumulated a lot of company knowledge and thus represent an informal management authority. I didn't find anyone like that at Wirecard. On the contrary, after a few months I took on this role myself as an external consultant and provided the relevant information to others. In my contractual role, it is usually my job to prepare strategic decisions and present them to those responsible for decision-making. At Wirecard, I was allowed to make these decisions myself, an absolute no-go that made my work easier in terms of achieving my goals, but that left the stale aftertaste that the management simply didn't want to be responsible for the decisions taken. This went hand in hand with my observations that the responsible superiors quickly pulled themselves out of the affair when there were issues that indicated serious problems. One experience in particular made me think. A financial statement presented to me included undistributed surpluses in the income statement. At the end of the year, this item is to be written off against equity. This is basic accounting knowledge. If bank ledger management was not aware of this, one would have expected at least one employee to have this knowledge. Another of these conspicuous observations were some loans in the portfolio that had had neither interest nor repayment for many years, but were on the books without any value adjustment. If at all, such a thing only occurs in exceptional cases. In any case, it turned out that when I asked for an explanation of the circumstances, Stephen von Erfa came to my office one day and pointed out that this procedure had been agreed with the BaFin and that I should no longer ask such questions. Not only is it inconceivable that the BaFin has approved this practice, even such a request to the BaFin would wake up sleeping dogs, a thing that Wirecard did not want to risk under any circumstances. In my letter dated January 30th, 2023 to Stephen von Erfa's lawyer, I describe this incident, substantiating my knowledge of the company, and ask him to confirm the conversation between us. Secondly, I urge him to plead guilty for aiding money laundering. The lawyer, Mrs. Stetter, did not answer. In my dossier to the Committee for Investigations of the German Parliament dated November 17, 2020, I summarized this as follows, expecting questions from the committee. Seen from the outside, Wirecard Bank was a completely normal group bank, as is usually the case with car banks, for example. Under the surface, however, things were very different, although not classified as such. More on that in Season 3, Episode 3. The Wirecard Group functioned like a financial holding company, at least. In order not to give the impression that one could even be a bank, one ran one's business like an ordinary industrial or service company. This means that invoices were issued for the services rendered. So far, so good. If a merchant wanted to receive payments from credit card statements immediately, as described above, a loan had to be granted. But only banks can do that. Consequently, this transaction had to be forwarded to the bank. However, banks only know bank accounts. A clever system has been devised to turn invoices into bank accounts. The invoices and incoming payments were aggregated at customer level using the criteria of maturity and currency. The methodology I called synthetic accounts is quite exotic, but basically there is nothing to complain about. except that the system in the company was a black box and nobody could provide any information about it. In order to be able to consolidate the bank's business with the group on the balance sheet, however, life was made too easy for itself. Instead of keeping their business in a dedicated bank ledger, they kept a ledger system designed for industrial corporations. In addition to the lack of programmers for the many necessary adjustments that result from this, the responsible employees have regularly lost track of it. How auditors and the BaFin were able to sign off on these bank processes is still a mystery to me. In total, I took part in 2 NPP, new product process. It was my job to assess whether the planned acquisition of a fintech company would arise suspicion that the group as a whole could be considered as a bank by BaFin. This is not unusual behavior either. Given the cost, no financial company likes to be under scrutiny. That was one of the reasons why banking supervision was no longer under the responsibility of the German central bank, but instead got relocated to a separate authority, the BaFin. What was striking, however, was that this committee was wildly determined to buy everything before you can say blueberry pie. After I concluded in both cases that the feared scenario could actually occur, I was not invited anymore. One thing is certain, that a systematic money laundering did not take place in the bank, but in the corporation instead. More on that in Season 3, Episode 2. Despite all the above circumstances, which are relatively unproblematic in themselves, I have made the decision not to extend my contract with Wirecard. The overall picture of my experiences made me do it.